We are hardwired to comparison. You want to know what your peers are up to. For a lot of people, it's motivating. This idea of self-efficacy, when they look at it in poverty, if you take children out of very poor neighborhoods and you put them in the wealthier neighborhoods, they're more likely to earn 30% more in their life because the networks that they form, or just observing, like, hey, I can do that. There's nothing special about this idiot who was born with a silver spoon. I can do the same thing.
We have today on the podcast Dr. Sue Varma, whose new book is called Practical Optimism, The Art, Science, and Practice of Exceptional Well-Being. And this woman, I kid you not, her background, her accolades are no joke. She's also an Emmy Award winner. She's won an award for outstanding service and a mayoral
Proclamation.
Oh my God, you've got everything. Notably, she was recognized as one of the world's top 5 leading health experts by a global citizen for her contributions during the pandemic. So you've been around the block a few times. This book is not just your first entree into the world. You were, weren't you someone who was very instrumental in helping with the survivors and the victims of the World 9/11?
Yes. I was the first medical director of the World Trade Center mental health program at NYU.
My gosh. And then what is the Share Care Emmy Award?
Yes.
So what is this?
So the Share Care Emmy recognizes excellence in innovation in media and healthcare. So anyone who can bring a message to the masses and sort of be scientific and credible, but accessible. And so, the work that I do in the public, whether it's on television as a medical contributor or keynote speaking or with my patients, it's very much focused on education because I really want to empower people with tools and resources that they can implement immediately into their lives.
I know that's why I wanted to have you on the show. I was saying to you before we started that you got me at the word practical, right? Because so many of these things in these books they're theoretical and they're not very actionable, and it's really hard to kind of take the information and integrate it really quickly. And you really give some amazing ways that people could adopt these things and really change and help themselves and optimize where they are right now.
Thank you.
No, it's great. And that's why I'm really happy to have you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. And I love the work you do, Jen. So thank you.
Oh gosh, thank you. So I wanted to actually start with, is this your first book?
My first book, yes.
This is your first book?
Yes.
Wow, but you've been around, you've been much more behind the scenes. And
Yes.
This is now, is this your first time being so forward then?
Well, I've been on television for 15, 17, 20 years and public speaking and radio and just a variety, and been interviewed on a variety of well-known platforms in print, but I have been wanting to write a book for a long time. My patients always ask me, Dr. Varma, what can we do in between sessions? I really find it's very actionable and helpful, but when I leave here,
Right.
I want to take a part of you into my life. And then I realized, I'm speaking through these television shows, let's say to millions of people, but those are, in 30-second sound bites. They're 3.5 to 5 minutes max, right? I've done a few, for the Share Care Emmy, it was with a group called Med Circle, and it was a longer 2.5-hour depression series. So we were able to unpack, but for the most part, it's very hard unless you're going to see me one-on-one to get all of this knowledge and advice that I've spent years and years and years in training and continuing medical education and constantly learning. I think of myself as a lifelong learner, and I'm never going to stop. So I was like, how do I bring this information to people all over the world, remote parts of the world? It's already getting translated in Arabic, Turkish, Spanish, Chinese, Korean. And
Wow.
It's amazing. And the book hasn't even come out in English yet. It'll come
I was going to say, the English book's practically not even out. So do you still have a practice then? Do you still see patients?
Yes, I do. I have a private practice, but it's,
oh my God.
But I was like, each patient you're spending 45 minutes to an hour, and I'm never going to stop that because I love working with people. And my practice has evolved and sort of changed over the years. In my private practice, a lot of our training in Western medicine is simply to get ill people better, right?
Mm-hmm.
But better, but not well. And I hate the fact that you leave people hanging in a way. It felt like going from dysfunctional to functional. Very valid and important part of what doctors do, don't get me wrong. But I want to take them now from functional to optimal. And so that is kind of where I'm spending the next years of my life and trying to make an approach that everyone, whether you can afford therapy or not, whether like you're going to ever go to it. I'm not saying that this book is going to replace therapy. Not saying that at all. It could be a supplement to the individual work that you do. But let's say you're not for it. You're like, I don't have the resources. I'm not interested. I'm not willing. I want to give people a mindset. And that's how practical optimism differs from positive thinking, because positive thinking is great. It's important to have. Some of us are born with it. But what do you do if you're not born with it? And what if you're like, okay, I'm a positive thinker, rah, rah, but why is nothing happening for me? And this book teaches you how to turn positive outlooks into positive outcomes.
That's really interesting. The first question I was going to ask you was, what is the difference between being optimistic and being positive? And that was really my first question. And you're saying that is, can you basically, so I use that, I want to have that in a clear, concise soundbite, the difference between being an optimist and being positive, because that's how I always thought of themselves. I thought they were very similar.
Yes. So optimists, specifically practical optimists, do more than just look at the world in a positive, hopeful way. They actually turn it into action. And that's the biggest difference, because hope is both a noun and a verb. And practical optimists do both. They think positive, but then they act proactively. And they don't give up.
I really,
Yes.
and you put 8 pillars of practical optimism.
Yes.
And so and also, because I know there are people I meet, and I'm actually much more, I think I was born genetically a little bit more pessimistic. I say more realistic, you know, depends on, it's a euphemism, I guess, right? And I think in your book, you talk about the fact that 25% of your happiness level, your optimism level is basically genetic.
Yes.
And you can actually work on 75% to be much more optimistic.
Yes. And when I found that out, Jen, it was so incredible, because I got interested in this work when I was working with trauma survivors. And we went deep into the literature on resilience, because none of us had worked with trauma on this mass scale before. So all the clinicians were kind of learning as we were going along.
Right.
And when I learned about resilience, there were all these factors that were involved. And optimism was one big one. But then we thought, okay, you're either born with it or not. Years later, studies would show that not only is optimism genetic, it's associated with the oxytocin receptor gene, but instead of just getting stuck there and being like, oh, well, if I don't have the right gene, then I'm not going to be optimistic. No, it actually showed that the gene is associated with skills. And guess what? All of us can learn skills. Which skills? Problem solving, emotional regulation, asking for help, learning how to cope better. So I was like, I'm already doing this in my practice every day. I don't have a name for it. And then when I looked around, the healthiest people I know, my dad is like 87 years old. He walks 5 miles a day. He picks up my kids from school. He helps with dinner. Like, he just goes the healthy, like, knock on wood, he's doing so well. And I was like, he is the living, breathing example. I didn't know that my entire life. He came from very little. He built a practice, a mission with him and my mom. And I was like, this is the secret to exceptional longevity. And that's what I found. The studies show that optimists live longer, 10 to 15%. They have better health because they have better habits. So, you know, these 8 pillars are sort of like me trying to codify what I found in the science and then kind of bring it and distill it and make it sort of in everyday language so that we all can benefit from it.
So then what are some of the pillars that we can take action on? Because
Yes.
that's really what it is, right?
Yes.
If you are someone who is naturally more pessimistic,
Yes.
or quite frankly, if your life isn't going the way you want it to go,
Yes.
right? Like, you know, I feel like we're living in a place, in a culture where people talk a lot about manifestation, about visualization, about putting these vision boards, but then what, right?
Exactly.
Then what?
Then what? Totally. And you know what, Jen, you said something very interesting before, like that you think of yourself, you're like, maybe genetically I might skew on the realistic / pessimistic side.
More pessimistic. I was being nice. I was kind of being, you know, that euphemism was realistic.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is pessimists are actually more accurate in their read, right? But in terms of
Okay.
the world, like if you ask them like what's more likely to happen, what actually show them a picture of a car accident, what happened here, they will always tell it to you as it is. They see it as it is. And I love my friends for that who fall into that category. And at the same time, they may not always have the same success that optimists do, because you just need to not get mired in the negativity. So
Totally true. How do you not get my, so me and my friends who are similar to me, we had this conversation a lot, right? Because sometimes ignorance is bliss.
yeah.
The less you, right? Like the less you
Totally.
notice, the less you
Yes.
kind of see, like, you walk around blissfully ignorant and happy.
Yes.
And therefore, you kind of are more optimistic. But what happens to the people? I'm asking for a
Yes.
friend
Yes.
who kind of like, who does notice all the little like idiosyncrasies in
Yes.
people and things, and like very cognizant of
Yes.
all of these, of everything, right?
Yes.
Like, so I like nitpick.
Yes.
Or my friend nitpicks, right?
Yes.
So then I feel like that, then you get mired and it goes down a rabbit hole, right?
Yes.
For people like that, what do you tell them?
Yes.
How could they stop ruminating,
Yes.
stop picking up on these things,
Yes.
and focusing on the negative?
Yes. So, look, I will say, look, use your superpower to your advantage. And if
Okay.
your superpower is that you see everything, totally cool. There's nothing wrong with it. And I can identify with that, Jen, honestly. Like, I see the difference, let's say, between me and, like, let's say my husband, right? He won't notice as much. And a lot of the couples that I work with,
Totally.
I kind of hear that divide between the men and the women, where the women are like, I'm walking down the street, I notice everything about this person, and they looked shady and dangerous to me. And then the partner will be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I did not see that. And the two people are perceiving the same exact situation.
Is it men, or is it that women are much more perceptive than men?
I think that the women are often, I mean, it's a stereotype, but they're more in tune to sort of these social cues and these nuances and subtleties in relationships and slights and like who negged who, and I
Yeah.
think so much of from an evolutionary point of view, our survival depends on the tribe accepting us. So when you're raising daughters, for example, like your daughters are going to come home at a very young age and talk about how they were made to feel, this person emotionally, like, the mean girl talk, that kind of thing. You see that a little bit more because the interpersonal relationships are the focus of women's lives. And so they are more in tune, but they are also, unfortunately, more susceptible to some of the pessimism and therefore depression. So major depression runs on average twice as more common in women than it does in men, cisgendered women.
Really?
Yes.
So, because I mean, depression, like I ruminate, but I don't think I'm depressed. And I feel like that can be, rumination
Yes.
is such,
Yes.
is what gets you stuck.
Totally. And it can, like, luckily, and so we'll talk about how to get out of the rumination, because what I learned in the research and with my patients is often, not in mild cases, right? Because I definitely tend to have a tendency sometimes to like fixate on something or ruminate. Like if I see something or somebody hurt my feelings and I love this person and like I've gone to bat for them. And then I was just like, how could you have been so cold and insensitive? Like in my head, right?
Right.
But the difference, and I put myself in the practical optimist category because I've had to work at it. And that's what this is. This is a practice, right? It's a choice, it's an action set, it's a skill set, it's a mindset, right? And it's a practice just like yoga, just the way you're in amazing shape, Jen, because you work your ass off. Like I've seen you on your Instagram and, and you're like, you have to put in the hustle. Like that's the name of your
Yeah, you gotta
habits
put
and
in the
hustle.
work.
Your podcast is very much what this book is about. It's like habits. That's actually practicing healthy habits is one of the 8 pillars. It's the last one, but it's about hustle and you have to put in the work. You have to grind, right? So if you are one of those people who tends to ruminate, say, that's fine. I have a tendency to see things a certain way, but I am going to choose to not allow myself to dwell in pessimism. Instead, I am going to, and I give tons of techniques. One of the things that I find really helpful, and there's science behind it, if you find yourself perseverating, let's say it's a work problem, you're sitting there in front of your computer and you're like, I just don't know what to do, or whatever it is logistically that you can't figure out, get up and take a walk. The optic flow that's involved when you're walking, because you have to navigate not getting hit by cars, like, I don't know, a tree falling, whatever it might be, you're looking left and right. And that literally that motion of your eyes takes you outside of the rumination, something called the default mode network, where you're not actually engaged in a task. And so your mind is just like ruminating. That's one way, going for a walk. The second one is keeping a journal, a worry diary. And the worry diary is everything that's on your mind, just put it down. And you know what? Not just put down your worries, add it 10 times, make it 10 times worse. I want you to think of the worst possible scenario. The sky is going to fall. They're going to hate me. They're going to fire me. And what happens is you become desensitized over time. You start to notice a pattern. Interesting. I keep thinking about the sky falling over and over and over again, and it actually hasn't fallen. Interesting. Maybe the world is not as much of an unsafe place, or maybe people don't hate me as much as I thought. So two things come out of this when you choose to worry on paper. Number one, you've gotten it out of your head. Then you start to notice a pattern. And we know science shows that 85% of the time, the things that you worry about don't actually happen. And when they do, you are better equipped to handle them than you gave yourself credit for.
I mean, I totally agree with that. And I also think that when you release that emotion outwardly, like you're expressing it somehow versus suppressing it,
Yes.
it must be better for your overall
Totally.
sense of like well-being.
Totally. And when you start to express your emotion in a healthy way, in a pro-social, proactive, kind, gentle, not like character assassinating the other person or kitchen sinking, lot of your medical problems like that can't be explained. Like you've gone to the doctor and they're like, I don't know, you've gotten a clear bill of health for your headaches, for your irritable bowel syndrome, for your
Yeah.
acne. Look, I'm not saying that there is no medical basis for all of these things that go beyond stress, but we know for sure that suppressed emotion leads to any number of medical problems from head to toe, from cardiac disease, cholesterol, diabetes, something called broken heart syndrome, where a person gets an arrhythmia and maybe gets a heart attack. So we cannot,
From a broken heart?
from a broken heart, like where, like, let's say someone you love died or someone you love, like, completely abandoned you out of nowhere. I mean, often it's in people who might have had some susceptibility to begin with, but emotional devastation, emotional rejection is registered in the brain as if you were physically injured.
So is that why when a lot of times when you were married for 50 years or
Yes.
70 years and one of the people, like the husband or the wife,
Yes.
passes away,
Yes.
usually within 6 months, the other spouse
Yes.
passes
Yes.
away?
Yes.
Because you really are dying of a broken heart.
Yes, and the way to sort of buffer against that is the first pillar of practical optimism, which is having a very strong purpose in life, where you might love your spouse, but you're like, you know what, I have a greater meaning, that, and I don't want to diminish anybody's grief because I can't even imagine what it's like. I lost my mom. My parents were married for 45 years and they had an incredible marriage. They were best friends, biggest cheerleaders, biggest supporters. But my dad has gone on to live like because he found purpose. He's a child psychiatrist. He loves spending time with children. He loves spending time in nature. He's getting us to travel all over the world. He's in his late 80s. He's like, when are we going? We went to the Maldives with him. We went to India. We did a 1,000-mile road trip all over Europe. We went to Vancouver Island. These were spearheaded by him. He was like, I am going to. And he's always been sort of the life of the party, doesn't drink, loves people, constantly WhatsApping his medical school friends from 50 years.
But you said something that was very important. He was always like that.
Yes.
So that's what I really want to hold on to
Yeah.
because I think that this is like the thing. He was always like that. So his baseline was already programmed to be that way.
Yes.
My husband, same thing. The most optimistic, happy, positive person. Recently, 6 months ago, he broke his neck and his back.
Oh, no.
He was in a mountain biking accident, flipped over the handlebars, broke his neck and his back. He is, if you saw him now, no, so you would never even know he even had an accident. He did not stop working.
Oh my God.
While in the hospital, he went to get his back. They had to operate on his entire back, but they could not touch his neck because if they touched his neck, he wouldn't have any mobility. The doctor said they never saw anybody walk away from this accident alive, if not paralyzed. And it is solely because he is and always has been. His constitution is positive,
Amazing.
happy, and I can do it. That is just who he always has been that way.
Amazing.
And so because of that, his trajectory in life
Yes.
has panned out that way.
Yes.
So he won't accept negative. Like he doesn't even think, it doesn't even enter his brain.
Yes. Yes.
And so to me, I think like, and I'll never be like even a fraction, no matter how many things that you tell me to do, as many tools as I have in my toolbox, as many things that I tell myself and journal, I'll never have that
Yes.
level of
Yes.
optimism.
Yes.
So is there like some type of, like you can only move the barometer so
Yes.
much?
Yes.
Because I feel like even with all of these
Yes,
things,
yes.
our nature is still ingrained in us.
100%. And I'm a big believer that like your nature dictates a lot. And at the same time, Jen, I have seen miracles happen. Like in my practice, I have seen people who say exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
And I think that in time, it may not be your default setting. I'll be honest with you. It's not my default setting. What you're telling me about like with your husband, that's not my default to go through a life-threatening accident and wake up and be like, I'll be fine tomorrow. Hell's no.
Yeah.
But what's happened over time through my own therapy, I entered into cognitive behavioral therapy during a, sort of crisis and having my own physical symptoms because of suppressed emotions. And what I learned is that, okay, my default setting may be to catastrophize or imagine the worst thing happening or whatever. But then very quickly, within a certain amount of minutes, I have to say, okay, no, Sue, what are we going to do right now? And then I recognize this is what I'm doing. These are my cognitive
Right.
distortions. So you're 100% right. I mean, it's kind of like, okay, there's some people who have diabetes and maybe they're going to be insulin dependent so that they need something from the outside. But isn't it great that we have medical technology and now we have a book that gives you that thing from the outside?
Exactly.
And the word that I use is emotional immune system. And when you're asking me about books, I'm like, that was actually the first book I wanted to write. It's called, I had it in my mind, How to Boost Your Emotional Immune System, right? Because that's what I think of practical optimism is some of us might have, quote, thicker skin, right? Our skin is our barrier to the outside world.
Right.
And some of us might have, and I hate that expression because it has such a negative connotation in our culture, like a toxic positivity, like just develop thicker skin. Like, no,
Yeah.
I was born with the skin I'm born in, right? Like if you're blue eyes, if you're green eyes, if you're brown eyes, unless something catastrophic happens, that
Right.
is your eye color. And so when you're talking, that's what I'm hearing. Like my husband was born with this constitution, 100% right. But I'm going to say for me, maybe I'll never be like your husband 100%, but with the work and the tools, I'm at like 85, 90, 95%. And I can say something, Jen, we're meeting now, but from knowing this world and life and brand and work and mission that you've built, you have to have a practical optimist mindset, right? Because how could you have achieved all these things? Because there's so many things that get in your way in life.
Well, yeah, I feel like you could move. So to your point, I think if someone is a 3, let's say in optimism, or a 2, you can push it to a 6 with
Yeah.
skills, or
Yeah.
a 7. You may not get to a 10,
Yes.
but that should not be your excuse for not
Yes.
attempting.
Yes.
And I do believe also that when you make these attempts and you have little peewee successes,
Yes.
that builds
Yes.
your muscle to
Yes.
keep on going and try again.
Totally.
And so that's why for me, I believe like the habits are so important. So like, how do you construct your day to be
Yes.
the most successful you can be?
Yes.
So then you can win at the thing that you want the most.
Exactly.
And so I love the fact that you talk about the purpose piece, like your dad, because I was on a podcast, someone else's podcast, and they asked me like, what do you want for your kids? Do you want your kids just to be happy? And I thought of that. It was recently too. And I'm like, no, I don't want my kids to be happy. I want my kids to be productive.
Interesting.
Because if you're not productive, you'll never be happy. Because you get a sense of self-esteem and self-worth when you're
Yes.
providing and doing purpose in the
Yes.
world, giving back, having some kind of reason to get up in the morning.
Yes.
I think it's very arbitrary and like pie in the sky, this word of happiness.
Yes.
Because it ebbs and flows,
Totally.
right?
Totally.
And so I want to stay, so you said something in the book that I was like, oh my God, I love this. That like exercise breeds productivity or purpose.
Yes.
And then if you are someone who is purposeful, it kind of, you become more physically fit. And
Yes.
you have a whole thing in here. Of course, I didn't want to write it. See, I'm blind without my glasses,
okay.
but you know what I'm talking
Yes,
about.
yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so like for so many levels, like not only like the neurochemical of like, okay, that you're boosting your endocannabinoids and your endorphins, right, and serotonin, and as a result of exercising, it boosts even one session of like 20, 30 minutes. It boosts your attention, your mood, your memory, and your concentration. And these are all the things that we need to spur action, right? So if you leave, even if it's a 15-minute workout session, you feel as if you've accomplished something. If you can exercise in the morning, you've won the whole day, right?
100. By the way, when you ask me, like, how did I achieve something? Because I have to be a practical optimist. No, I don't. I actually am just someone who exercises daily, and I recognize how my mood shifted and my the neuroplasticity of my brain, I think, changed when I really built that into my daily system because of everything you just said, because of my focus, my productivity. I became I was a happier person, and I felt like I can accomplish the world.
Yes.
I can conquer the world because I
Yes.
felt better.
Yes. And that's when people say, like, what's one thing that I can do today? I would say, if you're feeling lost in your purpose, in general, I always say with purpose, put the cart before the horse. And if you don't know what to do, listen to Jen's podcast, right? Listen to Habits and Hustle.
Listen to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Like,
Read your book.
yeah,
Read Practical Optimism.
read-
But okay, go on.
And the things that, and go to a networking thing, go out into the world, and anything that inspires you, signing up for a continuing education class, like anything that gives you joy. And that's what I love about what you just said about happiness kind of being arbitrary. And that's the difference in my mind between happiness and joy. Because happiness is leaving it to the outside world and leaving it to accolades, leaving it to success. Similar to the concept in a way of self-esteem, which is if I'm winning, my self-esteem is high. If I'm losing, my self-esteem is low. And I like this idea of pride, one of the 8 pillars, which is intrinsic sense of self-worth, that I have worth simply because I'm human. And at the same time, joy is about cultivating challenges of choice to do something that is you're learning and then you're also contributing. So that's where like purpose comes in. And I love that that's what you want for your kids because that's within their control.
Right. I mean, don't don't let somebody else control your destiny.
Yes.
Like take ownership and
Yes.
design the life that you want.
Yes.
By doing these things.
Yes.
But you said something, it was like in your book. It was like purpose, actionable purpose.
Yes.
Is that what you called it?
Yeah. Like it's,
God, I told you I'm blind. I can't see anything I wrote here. But yes, is that what you called it? Exercise? Yeah. Yeah, you called it actionable purpose.
Yeah, putting your purpose into action, and being very deliberate, this is what I'm going to do, and that's how things get done. And exercise is key because you end up feeling, not only when you talk about the positive mood, people minimize or they don't understand the role of having a positive mood. Let's say there's a stack of envelopes or mail that you need to get through. Let's say it's bills. Let's say it's something that you've been avoiding. Let's say it's writing that blog post that whatever it is that you've been wanting to do, make the phone call, starting the online class, you've been procrastinating. When you come with a positive mood, you, like you said, can take on the day. You're more likely to send out that one email that could potentially change your life. And Jen, I'll be honest, I didn't come with any special sort of privilege. I didn't have any connections, and I feel like I've built, even though my natural bend in life may be skewed to be like, oh my God, the sky is going to fall, right? The difference is that I never allowed myself to dwell in pessimism. Instead, I dwell in possibility. What can happen, right? What's the best case scenario? Even though my mind wants to maybe sometimes go towards the worst case scenario, I have to ignore it. And that's the actionable part. The worst case scenario would never have left the house, would have been a shy 12-year-old girl who never went and introduced myself to people. That person could never be the public speaker, never could have given 2,000 media interviews. I would have just been like, people are going to hate me. They're not going to understand what I'm saying. They're going to think I'm full of myself, anything. I could have gone down rabbit holes. And so I think it's important that, yes, and feel the fear, feel the negativity. And at the same time, when you come back after the exercise, after that walk, after that 15-minute journal entry, just be like, all right, I have reset. Now what am I going to do? Always come back, create space for emotions, for anger, for grief, for healing. And at the same time, give yourself a time limit. I'm going to come back. I feel like shit right now. I'm going to go to bed. That's what I do. When I can't solve a problem, I rest. And then the solution often comes to me early in the morning when I wake up because I'm calmer. Mm-hmm. I always say nothing good happens after 9 p.m. So if you're trying to resolve a fight, it's okay to go to bed angry sometimes. Yeah. Because you wake up and you're like, why was I, what is...
You know you're older when you say nothing good happens after 9 p.m. because it used to be 1 a.m. It was 2 a.m., then 1 a.m., then midnight, and now it's basically 9. It's going to be 6 pretty soon, How old are your kids, by the way?
They're 10 and 12.
Oh, very similar to my kids. I have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old. But,
oh, beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, which is what I wanted to ask you. When you have this, the real natural stresses of life, right? people who are parents full time, when people have a career, they have their full time jobs and they're a mom. I'm going to say mom, not a dad, because it usually falls on the mom. Sorry, but that's the truth. And you have like a lot on your plate and you
Yes.
can't get to these things legitimately.
Yes.
How can you, would you tell people, like, how can you create optimism, like if in a real way? Like, what are some like easy other tools that people
Yes.
can do?
So first thing I would say is like have a go-to person in your life. I'm like, I know that that's maybe a privilege, like to have a best friend or a good friend, but I think if you have a mutual understanding with someone to be like, do you mind if I could reach out to you? And I'm happy to be your sounding board. So I think like social support is really important for women, like in whatever form. It could even be just like another parent in your kid's class. I found like that's an area of community that a lot of people find when they're having children. The other thing is anticipating obstacles. And I feel like people don't do this enough. Like with the whole manifesting thing, I'm not against it at all. Like people have asked me about this. I was interviewed on the Washington Post, or like, you're a psychiatrist. How do you feel? And like, I don't know if they were like, I think a lot of people ask me that question thinking I'm going to poo poo it. And I'm not, because what's wrong with dreaming, right? Like I'm a dreamer. I want to think big. I want to
Right.
have big visions. It's the only way you're going to achieve something. And at the same time, I would say, be very deliberate in being like, I want to get from point A to point B, and who is going to help me. So what you're talking about creating optimism, part of it is about skill building and proficiency. When you were talking about the positive wins and how maybe you're at a 2 or a 3 in optimism and you want to get to a 7 or 8, first thing I would say, Jen, is also just to make sure that there's no underlying untreated mental health problem. Because I am a psychiatrist, I do know that a lot of times when people are feeling like they're fledgling in their purpose, it might be an untreated anxiety or depression, right?
I'm glad that you just said that, because I was going to say, at the end of the day, you are a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
Your job is to prescribe medication, and
Well, not
to
just that,
not, I
not
was gonna
just
say,
that.
and to talk
Yes.
therapy,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So, at what point are people like? At what point do you know if you have like some type of mental health issue? Because maybe you have one that's been like
Yes.
not diagnosed. Like maybe you
Yes.
have OCD, maybe you have anxiety, maybe you
Yes.
have these things. And at what point do you know if you should be medicated for it?
Yes. So here's my spiel on that. I'm a big believer in maximizing all the tools and resources you can naturally without medication. And if needed, careful consideration with an expert who prescribes medication, who can go over risks and benefits and alternatives. Because for some people, medication will be extremely beneficial. For some people, if you're sort of thinking, I'm in a dark place right now, I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. By the way, people should be calling 988 if they're listening to this and they're feeling hopeless and helpless. The National Suicide Prevention Crisis Hotline. I just want to put that out there.
It's
Just
988.
yeah,
Oh, I didn't
it's
know
like
that
a
was.
three digit emergency number dedicated just to mental health. Like the kind of the way you had like 911 was
Yeah.
where calls were directed. Now it's 988 as the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. So they can give you resources. Sometimes somebody may just want to talk to somebody in the middle of the night. And I've had patients who would say to me, I know I have a session with you tomorrow, but it's like 8 p.m. I don't want to bother you. And I always tell people, you can call me 24 hours. But sometimes they find it beneficial to just talk to somebody and they're like, that's all I needed at that moment. So I often say, if you're finding that you're really having a hard time, you're like, thank you, Dr. Varma, I've read your book, I love it, except I'm still feeling like crap. 100%, as I've said before, this book is not meant to replace therapy. Just because you love the book doesn't mean you should stop your own therapy. So when patients come in to see me, to your question about medications and what role, they have a very important role. If somebody comes in, right, one of the things that I learned in my training is if a patient can't make use of therapy because they can't wake up in time, they can't get out of bed, they're like, I want to make my appointment, but I forgot, because cognitive problems happen in depression. Your executive functioning is impacted. In ADHD untreated, you might miss appointments because of the executive functioning. So if you feel like for any number of reasons, you can't get out of bed to make it to your therapy appointment, you're in therapy and you're like, that's great, doc, but I don't want to live anymore. So it's a careful call that a doctor makes when they're talking to somebody that says, listen, I don't feel as if you're able to keep up with day to day, or that the pain is too much. If somebody says, I'm a mom of 2 kids, or I'm a CEO of a company, or I run, or my livelihood depends, then I'm not going to delay if the medication is an option, but also talking to them about side effects, which include from head to toe, everything from In very small cases, potentially worsening of suicidal thoughts. Very, very rare, but can happen. And so you should be monitored. When a doctor prescribes a medication, this is why I want to tell people who go and get medications from primary care doctors. Some of my dearest friends are primary care doctors. The problem is they may not have a follow-up session planned. And so they may get side effects and then they just stop taking the medication, or they were never bumped up to a proper dose because unfortunately in our society, we don't take mental health seriously in the same way. So that you go to a primary care doctor and they're like, let's talk about diabetes, cholesterol, hypertension. And the patient's like, oh, by the way, we call them doorknob comments when the doctor's about to leave the door and their handle is on their doorknob to say, all right, see you later, see you next year. And then you're like, oh, by the way, but I feel suicidal, right? Those are doorknob comments. When you're dropping a bomb,
I've never heard that expression.
when the doctor's about to leave. And I'm like, in that case, please schedule an appointment. If your primary care doctor is who you want to see, right? If you're lucky enough to have insurance, turn the back of the card and see the number for behavioral health. And sometimes your job will, if it has the benefits, might offer 8 or 10 or 12 sessions for free. And then they may give you referrals or your insurance might pay for it. Psychologytoday.com, ZocDoc.com. But the call to make medications depends on a person's functioning, how much impairment there is, how quickly they need to get better, what else is on the line in terms of family and job, and then side effects and like weighing the risks and the benefits. But for the most part, I look at medication as helping someone get through a rough patch so that they can put their head above water enough to utilize the skills in therapy. So it's kind of like if you're asking someone to do a triathlon, but they don't know how to swim and they're drowning, they can't even train because their head is not floating above water.
Right,
so get their
exactly.
head, that's where the medications can be really helpful. But it takes time. It takes 6 to 8 weeks for medications to kick in. And then for me, I always like there to be an end date, right? Because I know some people are going to have to be on medications for life. A lot of people may have a chronic depression. But then I also say, look at your diet, right? Like we need anti-inflammatory diet. There's more and more research about gut microbiome, how most of our serotonin is made in the gut, and that there's so many natural ways to help prevent and maintain treatment of depression. And I look at medication as just one important part of a comprehensive treatment approach.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this book, you looked at the best science, like in cognitive behavioral therapy. And a lot of what I'm saying is rooted in evidence-based, in exercise medicine, in immunology, in neuroscience. How can we maximize and optimize?
Yeah.
And so the one key thing is in Practical Optimism, get help if you need it. That's the bottom line. So this book is not going to save your life if you are drowning. It's going to tell you, please go get help.
Right. And it can help you like bump up wherever you are.
Yes.
But like you said, like how about even like ADHD or ADD? Like I feel like everyone walks around, including me, like, oh, I have ADD, la 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 la. But like, is that even a legitimately, like I feel, and I'm not on any medication and all the things, but I have like bad ADD, but I feel that if I work out, it gives me much more clarity and focus. So that's like and also it's a natural antidepressant. You can do all of these things, the exercise, the habits, and all the things, but still not get you to that, like, I'll still be late all the time. I'll still is that a sign that you need to be on medication if you are doing all the habits and the tools and yet you still are falling short? Like, or is that just being a human being?
It's tricky. It's a great question. And I would say, like, I love the fact when people maximize every resource they have, I give them so much credit because you're already winning at night. Like you're 90% ahead of the game. The other thing I would say is first, always getting properly diagnosed, right, by somebody.
Yeah,
and
not yourself diagnosed or your friends.
Yeah. And like,
right.
there's like TikTok therapy, which I love.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And like, I love the fact that like, I feel like, I've been a physician for 20 years. I've been commenting in the media for 20 years, and I noticed something change drastically with social media, especially with Gen Z and then just younger generations. It's like everyone is talking about mental health. So kudos to, and thank you to social media for doing that. And at the same time, we're not always getting the right diagnosis or we're self-diagnosing.
Right.
So there's something called the adult ADHD rating scale, and there's a bunch of symptoms. And if you check mostly often on some of these key symptoms of forgetfulness or procrastination, whatever it might be. And if you're open to it, no medications are without their risks or side effects. I have found that I've treated a lot of women who are like, oh my God, I never knew my entire life that I had ADD. And like with women, we know that it often presents as inattention, or girls. So then we get diagnosed. And especially when we were growing up, it was not a thing that was, hyperactivity in boys, maybe. And even then, nobody sought treatment for it. Now things are changing and parents are quick to notice it and to get the treatment. But I have to say, Jen, for people who genuinely have ADHD, stimulants can be effective and it can be life changing. The way I had a patient, he was a male patient, young in his 20s, and he said, but I'm a health person. I'm very health conscious. I don't put anything in my body. And training to be a professional athlete. And I don't push. I'm not getting paid by any of these companies.
Right, right.
And I've made a point not to. And I was like, I'm very neutral about this. And I'm going to provide you with the best evidence. But the way I look at it is, imagine your entire life you've gone without wearing glasses and you've never known it. And suddenly you put them on and you're like, holy, I can see now. And that's what it was. It was like a switch where, like, he's in class. He also wants to pursue like an advanced degree. And he's like, I could focus. I listened. I took notes. I remembered. I didn't go on my phone. I didn't zone out. It was crazy. It was like I was present in some ways for the first time. At the same time, some people are like, I just want to use it when I need to, right? To help get a paper done. Because some people will say, oh, I feel so much more creative and I can shoot the shit without it. I'm fine with that, right? So finding yourself a good provider who's flexible, who knows your goals, who can work with you, who can titrate, who can, work with you on few different medications, can talk to you about side effects, can help you get off of them, can start you. I always say, start low and go slow. So find the minimum dose that you need that's effective, and then go from there.
I mean, also, they always say that the most successful people have ADHD. Is that true? Because they don't focus and they're just like moving around from place to place? Like, is that just an inaccurate, is that just like one of these like, fibs that we tell ourselves because it sounds good and it makes us feel good. You know what I mean? We justify it, right?
Well, I do think that a lot of times people with ADD are also highly intelligent, right? And very creative, and they're people, and people gravitate towards them. They can be very warm. They have excellent sense of humors, and a lot of this they've had to develop as we talked overcompensation, right? So let's say you're someone who's late all the time, right? You're going to end up developing a sense of humor about yourself, about the world.
Self-deprecating.
Yes.
And resourceful, because you have to be.
Yes.
It teaches you a lot about like life skills, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then there's something like for some people, there's something endearing about it. So I don't want to glamorize it in any way, but I also don't want to stigmatize it.
Yeah. I mean, I want to talk about social media and like how I think, to me, this is one of the biggest problems with being optimistic these days, right? Because we're living in a place, talk about mental health problems. We're living in a place where people are not socializing anymore. People are not having real conversations. They're not doing what you and I are doing right now. They are looking at their social media page to see if they got some like or follow from a stranger, and that's hitting their dopamine. And the comparison game. You're looking at every other girl and comparing yourself to them, either how they look or with their lifestyle. And same with men, actually, too. That's been the demise, like in my opinion, of people's happiness. Talk about happiness and overall mental health. So it's not going away, and in fact, it's just going to get worse and more and more. Besides saying to me, you got to monitor what you're looking at, right? Like, don't have only hours where you can look. And I've asked this question to lots of different experts. They said, look at who you're following and monitor how much you're on there and blah, 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 blah. The bottom line is people are lacking social skills now because of it. They're not even able to socialize.
No, people can't even write proper text messages, right?
No.
Like, they're not even full sentences. There's all these like shortening, because what's happening is something called, and I cut you off, Jen, but there's something called like the shallowing hypothesis, and it's pervasive. It's from how deep we go in relationships to how deep we go when we read books. We find that you can read the same content, but if you're reading it on the screen, something automatically happens in your brain where you're like, no, I know what's going on, and you scroll. And what they find is that people who are reading same literature online are not as accurate in their reading and understanding and analysis of the material, because we associate this as a quick form, short form type of input, as opposed to reading from a book where your brain is also making associations. And I'm somebody who's very like, I don't want to say photographic. I wouldn't say photographic memory, that's too strong, but I can tell you that if I've read a word, I can tell you, oh, it was on the upper right-hand corner of a page. And a lot of us can do that. We may not even be aware of it. But then you end up using different cues to help with your memory, and it can translate into doing better on a test, for example. Like I have to do a lot of preparation before I go on like news interviews. So we are shallowing in our relationships. We're shallowing in how we perceive information and how we consume information. I've noticed that on Instagram when I first started, years ago, they were like, okay, you can create keep it to 3 minutes, meaning 3 minutes was like short. Then that became 90 seconds, then a minute, then 30. Now it's freaking 15 seconds. And they're like, and if you don't capture someone's attention in the first 3 seconds, I was like, well, I am not going to be big on Instagram because I like to talk.
Right?
I like to talk.
God,
and I can't capture your attention. And I'm not,
But that's the culture we're living in, and it's a really sad culture because more than anything, you're not having, I mean, you don't have to be an expert to know this in terms of like living a life that's full
Yes.
and happy. Talk again, the word happy or optimistic is having relationships that are meaningful and that
Yes.
have like a sense of like, satiation to it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
right. And people, the younger generation, even to be honest, our generation, they're like lacking now.
Yes.
People who are single, good luck. They're now going to be single forever
Yeah.
because even going on these dating apps,
Yes.
you're swiping and swiping. You'll meet someone, and then 5 minutes later, like, okay, I'm on to my next date. You
Yes.
can't even make a meaningful connection anymore.
It's the idea that something bigger, better exists
Yeah.
someplace else. And the idea that happiness is outside, happiness. And I just see in terms of what our values are and the priorities are, it's about wealth and it's about external achievement and external accolades. And the problem is when we look at money, right, the number system is infinite, right? So when I've worked with in my practice somebody who might fall into the billionaire category, they're like, oh, I have 2 planes, I'm going to buy my third one. When does it end? I have X amount of vacation homes, I'm going to have these many more. Like many people say to themselves, I'll be happy when, and they think they have a number in mind. The problem is once they achieve that number, it never stops. It's always a moving target. So we are hardwired to comparison. We are hardwired. And on some level, if you can recognize that maybe there's something healthy in the sense that you want to know what your peers are up to. For a lot of people, it's motivating. We find that, for example, this idea of self-efficacy, when they look at it in poverty, if you take children out of, let's say, very poor neighborhoods and you put them in the wealthier neighborhoods, they're more likely to earn 30% more in their life because for any number of reasons, the networks that they form or just observing like, hey, I can do that. There's nothing special about this idiot who's born with a silver spoon. I can do the same thing. So there's something motivating about being around, surrounding yourselves with
idiots.
Yeah.
By the way, that's so are you listening to my content? Because I talk about that all the time.
Oh, that's awesome.
I always say to people, like, people like, when I came to LA, it was like so easy to like get wins and be successful because I was around a bunch of yahoos who were like not hard workers, who were like literally like a bunch of bozos.
Yeah.
And the more people I meet and I realize, oh my God, like if that Yahoo can do it, I can sure as hell do it. Because I didn't come from I came from a very normal like upgrade, probably very similar. Like my mom's also like a psychiatrist. So it's the same type of situation. But like I feel like I didn't have any connections or anything. But you look out there, you're like, you know what? If that person could do it, I could do it too. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And like that's so funny. So that's interesting. Also, I feel that people who didn't have anything, they learned they learned the value of a dollar. They had to work for it. They saw around them people working super hard.
Yes.
Like I always saw my family working really hard. Nothing was handed to them or to me. And I was literally going to ask you, I had a conversation with my husband today because, living where we live, I'm surrounded by so many very wealthy people, right? Like just stupid money, right? And like they give their kids everything. And I feel they're doing such a disservice to these kids, right? Because they don't even like, you don't know what you don't know. And like these kids then are having all these mental health issues and they're like, well, I don't know why. I'm like, well, maybe because like you do everything for them.
Yes.
Maybe because you like give them everything, buy them everything. Don't let them like learn how to like be resilient and have like some self-efficacy.
Yes.
Yes. And you as a doctor, I want you to talk about this because I want to take that piece of this piece of the podcast and send it to people.
Yes.
Because me yammering on for not having a medical degree or, what I mean, it's not helpful. But I want you to talk about this. The importance of being able to fail on your own, to know that you have to, like, work ethic.
Yes.
Please.
Yes. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's very much, I would say, a catalyst for it, as long as you don't allow yourself to get mired in the negativity. I think it's really important that parents should, in a very healthy, subtle way, light a fire under their kids' butts. And what I mean by that is, do not make things unnecessarily too easy for them. And I'm not saying that don't help them in crisis. I'm not saying don't help them in time of need. I'm just saying that think about all the things that you're doing to enable your children. There is a huge difference between supporting somebody that you love, and that means investing in their own self-growth. So the next time you want to swoop in and make somebody else's life easier, ask yourself, am I helping them build their own self-efficacy, or am I giving them an easy way out?
Can you talk about what really self-efficacy is and the
Yes.
importance of it?
Yes. So self-efficacy is your belief in your own ability to do something. It could be general self-efficacy, as in I am a capable person in life, or it could be emotional self-efficacy. I have the ability to regulate my emotions. It could be self-efficacy as a parent. When in challenge, I can usually figure things out. It has to do with confidence in your abilities. Self-efficacy is more about the confidence in your abilities than it is your actual abilities. And I'm by no means saying don't have abilities. I'm not saying, fake it till you make it. I'm saying, keep learning. And the key with self-efficacy, and this was, that comes from Albert Bandura's work. He said there were like four main things. You can learn self-efficacy by doing things yourself. And that was the most effective way, is by learning, making mistakes, trying. Then there's by having, sort of vicariously learning through watching people, like when we watch sports games. It's through mentors, and it's through getting feedback from trusted people. So that's really key, that you have people that get you, that have your back, sisterhood, if you will, family, somebody who's like, they're not criticizing you, they're not trying to tear you down, but they're like, I've been watching you, and when you ask for advice, can say, this is what I might do something a little bit differently. So being able to make mistakes and fail and get up. Sometimes recently, like my kids are usually very good with their schoolwork, and I've never had to like stay on them recently so much. And then recently, a couple days ago, my kid, and the younger one, and he's like super sweet and just like kind of on his own, naturally very obedient. So I never thought I had to look at what he was doing. And then he came home one day and he was like kind of quiet, didn't come out of his room. And I found out that he got a low grade because he didn't turn in the assignment. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, that's not like you, like what's going on? And my default is to try to understand instead of like get upset or get angry. And, he was like, I was studying for the spelling bee. I kind of prioritized that, and he had won that. So I kind of, I don't know, just whatever. I couldn't get a clear answer. Was he like didn't prioritize it, he forgot, or he just didn't want to do it? And I was like, I'm not going to say anything to your teacher. It's up to you, And I would want to step in and being like, can I advocate for you? Maybe you are shy. Maybe you don't know how to communicate to your teacher that you needed more time for an assignment. But I was like, I don't want to make your life so easy. And at the same time, I'm a parent. So I'm like, at the same time, I don't want him to get a bad grade, right? So it's a very tricky position to be in, because you're like, I could affect the outcome of my child's grade on their transcript, versus stepping back, allowing them to experience the consequences and natural consequences of their own behavior. It's very small, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, I want him to fall on his own sword in a way, because how else is he going to learn? And if he got a bad grade, maybe it's only one semester, but then I hope that he would remember it for the rest of his life. So I was like, what do you think about it? He's like, I'm not proud of it. And then I sort of let him, I'm like, well, it's up to you. You can pursue it, ask for more time or an extension or send an email to the teacher. So I understand that there are going to be bigger stakes in life, like your kid gets into a car accident, something big happens. I get it. You're going to want to protect your child. But just see, are there small ways where the consequences are maybe very minute, where you allow your kid to make a choice and let them experience their own consequences. The problem is some kids will never have any, never feel it. And that's really, really hard. And that makes me very sad, because I've come in with patients who are like, my kid is gone through a million rehabs. And that just breaks my heart, because what do? They're like, they're so self-destructive. They don't want to live. And at some point that breaks my heart, because I'm like, as a parent, I can't even imagine being in a situation where you love someone and at some point you're so fed up and you're just like, that person has to hit rock bottom themselves in order to get treatment.
They say that building grit is the single most important thing for success as you get older, right? So how does someone teach or learn to be gritty if you come from a family that's like, parents that are doing everything for you because they have the means, right? It's
Yes.
very hard to sit back and not,
Yes.
because it's, again, it's like that's basically your world, that's your
Yes.
life.
Yes.
So you have to make a conscious effort
Yes.
to then not give to your child.
You have to. And I know how hard it is. And I know that probably sounds ridiculous to parents who are like, but I'm spending thousands of dollars in tutoring and extra tuition for the SATs and all sorts of, I'm giving my kid every privilege in life to succeed. But it all depends on how do you define success. If you are defining success by accolades and money and status, then sure. But I can guarantee you that the mental health will not be there. I can guarantee you that.
And I'm such a believer. I'm so thankful of how I grew up, where I grew up. I grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, a very small town in Canada. And I thank God every day I did, because it gave me it like built my value system very differently if I would have grown up like in Hollywood or somewhere, right?
Yes.
Is there a difference between self-esteem and self-confidence?
Yes. So, well, I'd make the distinction between, let's say, self-esteem and self-worth, right? And self-esteem to me is based on something that comes from the outside. Often we're finding studies that like a kid does well in school, you win a prize, something good happens to you, your self-esteem is boosted. People are patting you on the back. When you don't, it tanks. Self-confidence in this case, if I'm going to make the distinction, or intrinsic self-worth, is based on self-compassion. It says that I am human, I am capable of making mistakes, and it's okay if I fail. And people may think of self-compassion as like woo-woo, but it's actually really rooted in science. And we know that self-compassion can help after failure, whatever that means, fill in the blank for you. If whatever your failure looks like for you, if you are able to do like a 5-minute exercise of, this is based on Kristen Neff's work, like mindful observation of your feelings, acceptance, I'm a failure, I suck, fine. And then the last part is common humanity. And this part is so important to me. Are you the only person who's ever failed in life? Are you the only person to ever get a C? Like, no, you're not, right? You're human. And what self-compassion does is gives you a way out. It gives you a way forward. It says, now what? What are we going to do? Okay, we made an ass of ourselves. What are we going to do? Versus somebody with low self-esteem because of a, setback, you can get, with that rumination, get stuck in shame. And shame is very isolating. Shame says, I am a bad human. I am not worthy as a person. I am a F up. Versus self-compassion, which says, I did something bad, but I'm not bad. Like the character assassination piece isn't there.
So, but you're saying compassion. So, but self-compassion in my brain is different than self-confidence, or is it not in your brain?
I think of self-confidence, true self-confidence comes from having self-worth that is rooted in self-compassion. Self-confidence that's based on, I look hot today because I got a 6-pack, and then what happens tomorrow? You get into an accident, God forbid, and can't work out at the gym, and you can't, whatever it is, or it's based on X amount of money I have in the bank account, right? So there's things that are based on my distinction is anything that makes you feel good about yourself that's based on something else from the outside.
Is self-confidence or self-esteem?
Self-esteem or fake self-confidence.
Yeah, like, well, isn't there like true self-confidence is
yes.
like from within?
Yes.
The external
Yes.
is like fake self-confidence?
Yes, fake self-confidence or self-esteem. And it's
okay, so you're saying self-esteem and fake self-confidence.
Yeah, I'm putting them in the same bucket.
I understand.
I want to say in the 80s and 90s, there was so much research on like, we have to help our children boost their self-esteem. That was the terminology that was used. So I don't want to put anybody down if that's the
self-esteem. Okay.
Right? Because that was a common lingo. Now we're learning this very subtle distinction between self-esteem. We're going one step further. We're like, okay, self-esteem was good in the 80s and 90s. It was kind of like the way carbs were the right.
Yeah, like snack wells.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they were the enemy, or fats. Sorry, fats.
Fats was the enemy.
Yeah.
Pasta was like carbs were like the winner.
Yes. And like how we've evolved in our thinking since then. So similarly, it was all about boosting self-esteem.
Yeah.
And now we're learning that, and this is very new, and I don't think it's like really on anyone's radar, is that self-esteem is now sort of more very superficial and based on the outside world. So this is like a relatively new thing that like a very subtle distinction. If people want to still use self-esteem, I'm okay with it. But the science shows what you really want to work on is self-compassion. And self-compassion gives you lasting self-confidence because it says, I am not as good as my last project. I am good no matter what, and I think that's really hard. Like when I talk to people and they're always asking me like, what's the next project? And like keep wanting like, and even though they're coming from a good place, but they're like, how can you just be satisfied with XYZ? Like you've come so far, you've done so much, but like next, what next? What next? And I was like, hold on, like I don't need a what next mentality. And I think so many people they're weirded out by that. They're like, what do you mean? If you can be 10 times bigger, why wouldn't you? And I was like, because it comes at a cost. And I don't want to
Yes.
give that up. Like I have a good life. I want to hold on to my sanity. I want to hold on to my mental health.
It's so interesting that you said that, and I know we have to wrap soon, but like this is that stuff I was written down. I never even looked at it, but we're living in that culture of like enough, like it's never enough, because once you hit one marker, you want to get, especially if you're an ambitious person, right?
Yes.
You hit one marker, now what's next? What's next? Isn't that kind of like a symptom though of never being happy? Like,
Yeah.
because you're never happy with what you have.
Yeah.
Is it, and maybe you're the doctor, but like part of happiness, would you say, is like figuring out a way to be happy with what you have versus
Yes.
constantly seeking for more?
Yes. Yes. And like finding some sort of peace and pleasure and joy in what you have already built. But, it's at the same time, look, I get it. It's human nature to become satisfied, contented in a way, in a sort of, to become smug and be like, all right, like,
Well, it's more like if you're too ambitious, does that breed unhappiness?
it can. It can. It can. I mean, on one hand, like I love it. Like I have that streak in me and I love like wanting more and wanting to do more. But I think the key then becomes is to say, why are you doing this and for who and for what and what's the end goal? And is there a finite limit? And when are you going to stop and at what cost? And then to take an assessment and to say, okay, my ambition is great, but like, what is this costing me? And for some people, let's say if they have the time and the energy and they've cultivated good people in their life, because I have to say, like, my practice is full of high achieving people who have blind spots, right? Like, and I will say that I'm one of them, right? Like, and that's how I got into therapy. And if you read the book, you'll
That's
see.
everyone always ends up doing what they're like obsessive with, right?
Yes.
Because obviously, whatever, what is that saying that they say? Like, you become what you are, or that's what they say. Like if you can't do it, you become it, or
Yeah.
I don't know. Like that's why you become a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
That's why you come into fitness, because it's wherever
Yes.
we have our Mishigas, I call it,
Yes.
Jewish. I don't know what you say it, like
Yeah.
craziness or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. I mean, you learn, and those are the people I think that are best equipped because they're like, I've been there, right? So like, I feel like I can totally relate on so many levels
Right.
to a lot of what brings them and my patients in. But
Totally.
their ambitions, I think if you have the time and the space and the energy to keep going, by all means, right? But at some point, see if hypertrophy in certain areas of your life is causing atrophy in other areas of your life.
Oh, it always does. It's impossible to have balance.
Yes.
I don't believe in the word
Yes.
balance. It's like
Yes.
if you're going to be hyper focused on whatever you put focus on is
Yes.
going to grow,
Exactly.
and whatever you don't focus on will die.
Yes.
It's just what happens.
Yes. And so
right?
many people let, for example, the relationships in their life, for example, they put those on the back burner. So just be mindful and say, like, in the end, at the end of this all, where do I want to be? And if I want to be standing, there's an expression, it's an African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, travel together.
So true.
Keep the end in mind and say, when I have all of those things, who do I want to see myself with? And are those people going to be with me at the end? And if you want to be not alone, if you want to be with loved ones, if you want to be with strong friendships, companions, then cultivate those relationships very intentionally early on.
Yeah, 100%. That's why blue zones, that they live the longest because they are the happiest. And that's the happiest because they are so, it's about their lifestyle.
Yes.
They don't work to live. They don't live to work.
Yeah.
They work to live.
Yeah.
And they cultivate really strong relationships.
Yes.
And then one more question, then I'm going to let you out of here, okay? Because reframing is so important. You talk
Yes.
about reframing in the book.
Yes.
And I think people always use that word, like reframe, self-talk. Can you give people a tool, like a way you could actually reframe and change the talking that you say, like the negative talking that you have in your head or even out loud, to a more positive more compassionate way of talking?
Yeah. So in the moment, first of all, give yourself grace and say it may not always be possible to reframe, especially in the midst of grief, right? And acute disappointment if something bad just happened. Come back when you're feeling like your head is above water now, and then ask yourself certain key questions. First of all, what would I say to a friend? And this is all based in science. Second, how am I going to feel about this a year from now? How am I going to feel about this 5 years from now? Is there an alternative way to look at this? Was there something positive, however crappy the situation? Did I learn something from it? And if you can't see anything in this, right, ask yourself, what is the utility of my negative thinking? And the minute you ask yourself that, because when I was working with trauma survivors, they would say to me, but Dr. Varma, like, bad things could happen to me tomorrow. How do you know? And I was like, absolutely. What do I say to that? Something really horrific has happened to them already. And so there's nothing positive that came out of it, maybe, right? Except for then what is the utility? And if the utility is nothing, the cost is greater than the benefit of holding on to this negative thought, then at some point you have to make peace, accept it, and let it go. You know, one of the things that I learned from sort of having this Eastern background, my parents would ask me, is this a problem to be solved or a truth to be accepted? And
I love that.
yeah. And acceptance is unfortunately not taught to us enough. Acceptance is not resignation. It is not complacency. It is not accepting and embracing failure. It is simply saying, I am in this situation today. It doesn't mean I'm going to be in this situation tomorrow.
That's a great, I love that. It's not is it a problem to be solved or a truth to be accepted?
Yeah.
That's so great. I love that. I have more questions, but I'll let you go because I know you have Max. Poor Max happens to him all the time. Thank you. And your book is called, her book is called Practical Optimism, the Art, Science, and Practice of Exceptional Well-Being. And Dr. Sue, you are so, like, not only are you smart, but I can feel your compassion and your kindness. Like, it kind of like, you basically, it emanates from you. If that's, is that a word? Does that work?
Yeah. Thank you.
I wish you so much success with the book.
Thank you.
And people should pick it up. Like, I read 3/4 of it and I really got a lot out of it. It is practical. It is super actionable. And there are some great ways that you can change the way you feel, like today, you know, to feel better tomorrow. So where do people find you, get more information if they want to know more?
Yes, thank you so much. So the book you can find it anywhere books are sold, and it comes out February 20th. And you can learn more about me on my website, drsuvarma.com, the word doctor spelled out. And then I'm also on social media. Instagram is one of the most common places to find me, Dr. Sue Varma.
You're not a TikTok doctor?
No, not yet. I'm trying to take care of my mental health.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much for being on here.
Thank you so much.